call the meeting to order. If you would stand, face the flag for the pledge of allegiance. Tina.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks, Gene. Next on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of our regular meeting, February 6th. I think that you guys have had a chance to look those over.
Denny, did you have a question about those minutes?
I did, and I spoke with Lori, and
Okay.
we're correct on it.
Okay.
Or the minutes are correct. We're incorrect. The minutes are what's correct.
I make a motion.
Motion
I second.
second by Tootie, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We're now going to ask Jeff Carter if he would to present the 21-22 audit.
Jeff, do you care to turn that mic on? I didn't turn it back on. Make sure everybody's got their mics on, please. Should just slide over.
There it is. Thank you, Mayor and council members. You have in front of you two pieces of information from me. We will start with the bound copy, which is the actual audit report and financial statements for the city of Leitchfield as of June 30th, 2022. And I'll want to start by telling the council and the mayor that during my time frame over here, I appreciate the hospitality that Sabrina and Lori and the rest of the members and staff that you have here at City Hall showed me during that time frame. They made it easy and got all the information that I needed to complete this audit. So with that said, if you'll turn, and where we'll start is on page 5. I think it's 5, 6, and 7. This is actually our report on the financial statements of the city of Leitchfield as of June the 30th of 2022. And this report has been revamped and changed under standards from what, if any of you were on the council last year, and you look at it, it's going to be completely different, it's reorganized. So the first two paragraphs is the opinions. Used to, those opinion paragraphs was at the very end of the report. Now they're at the very beginning. So I'll read those two paragraphs to you because there's a little bit of language change in those. And it states, we have audited the accompanying financial statements of the governmental activities, the aggregate discretely presented component units, each major fund of the city of Leitchfield as of and for the year ended June 30th, 2022, and the related notes to the financial statements which collectively comprise the city of Leitchfield, Kentucky's basic financial statements as listed in the table of contents. In our opinion, the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material respects the respective financial position of the governmental activities, the aggregate discretely presented component units, and each major fund of the city of Leitchfield, Kentucky as of June 30th, 2022, and the respective changes in the financial position and, where applicable, cash flows thereof for the year end then ended in accordance with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America. That opinion is what they call an unmodified opinion now. Now, you may have heard in the past, we've used the term unmodified for several years. Before then, it was unqualified, and going back several years, it was called a clean opinion, and that's what this is. That means there's nothing that needs to be added to these financial statements or taken from these financial statements. These financial statements report everything that happened during the city's time frame of July the 1st of 2021 through June the 30th, 2022. Okay? The rest of the report lays out the way that it kind of used to. It talks about how we based our opinion, who's responsible for the report and the financial information, which is management, what our responsibilities are for the financial statements, and how we performed the audit and exercised professional skepticism, identified risk, obtained an understanding, and evaluated the appropriateness of the policies, etc. And then it goes down, talks about the required supplementary schedules that are in the back. I'll hold that and go over that with you. It talks about supplementary information and the single audit report which is the report on your governmental grants, since they were in excess of $750,000 for the year. And then it talks about governmental auditing standards. Both of those two reports are in the back. We'll cover that when I get to them, okay? If you have any questions at any time during these financial statements, stop me and I'll try to address them and go over them. The next section in the report, pages 8 through 13, is management discussions and analysis. And I'm not going to read through it because I'm going to go over it when we get to these financial statements here in a second, but it tells a comparison between the prior year and the current year, which was 2021 as compared to 2022 year ends. So if we look at page 9, there is a snapshot in total of the net position of the city of Leitchfield as of June 30th, 2022 as compared to 21. And as you can see, your current assets and other assets increased from 8.9 million to 10.8 million. Your non-current assets increased from 581,000 to 2.3 million. And your capital assets, net of the depreciation, increased from, well, actually decreased from 18.5 to 18.0. Some of that is due to depreciation on the assets, and some of that is due to some sale of old equipment on that decrease. Deferred outflows of resources is related to the state pension. Those numbers come from the state, but they decreased, the outflows decreased from 2.8 to 2.5. Your total current liabilities decreased around 130,000 from 1.2 to 1.1, and your long-term liabilities decreased 100,000 from 20.1 to 20 million. And your total liabilities, as you can see, decreased approximately 230,000 from 21.4 to 21.21. The deferred inflows of resources, which is the income portion of the pension, increased from 660,000 to 2.2 million. Now that is, when I'm talking about this pension, these are numbers that come from the state. This is what the pension plan has done over the year. What that indicates is that the pension plan is actually beginning to turn the corner and do or level off from what it's been doing in the last few years, okay? Your net position, which is the position of the city of Leitchfield, you amount that is invested in capital assets is 9.9 million. That increased to $110,000. Your restricted assets went from 81,000 to 151,000. And your unrestricted switched from a deficit of $1,040,000 to a unrestricted positive of 288,000. And your total net position is 10.3 million, which is an increase from 8.8 million. Is there any questions? What I will tell you, they had this discussion in the utilities meeting on that and about the deficit, and the utilities is showing a little deficit there. What happens is when you're building, or when y'all were building a couple of years, the city hall, it was being depreciated. So you had a lot of debt and a lot of building, and those numbers were reported net of debt on the top number. But once you start depreciating it, it starts releasing some of that, and then it flips back down into the unrestricted part. And basically, the unrestricted is the balancing number. Those first two numbers, they're set by statute on what you have to include in them. It's the total assets less the total debt, and then it's anything that's restricted, and then the fallout comes into unrestricted. Okay? Just kind of make that clear. The next page, page 10, is your program revenues. And as you can see, the total revenues increased from 10.0 million to 12.5 million. And the charges for services was up about 150,000. Operating grants is up over 2 million. That's the ARPA funds that came in during the year is the big part of that. And then the capital grants and contributions decreased from 322 down to 5,000. Your taxes and license increased around 450,000. I think the significant part of that is maybe payroll taxes. And your interest and other income increased from 211 to 445,000, and you had a gain on sale of assets of 493,000. Your total operating expenses and program expenses increased from 9.9 million to 11 million. Your change in net position actually increased. You had a $110,000 profit in 21. You had $1.5 million profit in 22. And as you can see, that shows how the net position changed. Any questions? Okay. Turning to page 14 and 15. The first financial statement I went over, this is the detail in the first column of the primary government of those numbers. The next two columns shows your component units, which is the utility system and tourism commission. So as you look across, your total assets is 10.5 million in the city in and of itself. The utilities total current assets is 4.6 million, and the tourism's total assets is 1.9 million. And as you look at the top, the significant numbers is the cash and cash equivalents. You had 9.3 million in cash in the city government and all the bank accounts. You had 3.8 in the utilities, and you have 1.7 in the tourism commission. When you moved down, as you move down, it shows what amounts of receivables, accounts receivable, taxes receivables, and other receivables that are due throughout is there for the city and each of the component units, and then it shows what your other current assets are. In the non-current assets, it shows your restricted asset, which is cash and investments of 1.9 million. That is mostly restricted for the bond on the City Hall building and some other, the ARPA funds and I think a park fund. And then the notes receivable is the 400,000, which is the Scotty's note receivable. The capital assets, land and construction is 5.9 million, and your other capital assets is 12 million. Over in the utilities, the land and construction is 13.0 million, and the 13 million, most of that is the water plant that was not put in place until this year, to this fiscal year in service. And then the 13.9 is your other assets in the utility system. Tourism's is 4.6. The most significant asset there would be the aquatic center. Deferred outflows of resources. In the city, 1.3 million for pension, 1.2 million for OPEB. In the utilities, it was 770 as compared to 678, and in the tourism, it's 55 for pension and 55 for OPEB. Now, the significant amount in the city is to do with the hazardous funding on that. Okay. Move over to your current liabilities. Things due currently within the next year. 1.1 million was the city's, 747 for utilities, and 256 for tourism. The non-current, which is mostly your bonds and notes payable, and then the down at the bottom, you'll see those net pension, net OPEB liabilities. The non-current liabilities is 20 million for the city, 18.7 for utilities, and 3.4. I'm going to touch on the pension and OPEB liabilities. That does not mean that the city actually owes that money. That is what the state is saying is the city's liability portion if there is a pension failure, of how many people that are in the pension plan that the city will be responsible for in case of pension failure. Does not mean that you have to pay that money. That money, I'll cover that in another table showing what you're contractually obligated to do and that you have met those contractual obligations, okay? Those, and I'll repeat that again, those numbers do come from the state. The state gives us those numbers, and those numbers have to be reflected in the financial statement. The deferred inflows, those are numbers that come from the state as well. It's 1.2 million for pension, $1 million for the other post-employment benefits, which is the healthcare portion of the pension, and your total is 2.2. The utilities is 1.1, and the tourism is 108. Again, those numbers come from the state as well. And then you see your net position down there is 10.3, 19.9 for the utilities, and 2.7 for tourism. And tourism, we had covered that a minute ago, that deficit is really due to the fact that most of that's still sitting in construction in progress. Okay. Page 16, 17, and 18 is the full accrual statement of activities, which is basically an income statement. The first column shows your total expenses, and it's broken down by departments. As you can see, your total governmental expenses was 11.0 million. Your utilities was 7.7, and your component, your tourism was 1.2. Your total component units was 8.9. You received from charges for services of 2.7 for the city. The utilities received 7.4, and tourism received 265. Your operating grants was 2 million from the city, 104 for utilities, and 127. The capital grants was only 5,000 for the city, 2,006,000 for utilities, and there was no capital grants received by tourism this year. Over on the far right, next page, it shows that through that part of it, the city was at a $6.2 million loss, the utilities was at 2.3 profit, and tourism was 921,000 loss. But that is really not true because we got the taxes on the next page. The report is separate. On the next page, it shows your taxes, your other governmental income, and things of that nature. And the city received 7.7 million in taxes from property taxes through net profits of the license all the way down. So the change was a profit for the city of 1.5 million, a profit for utilities of 2.4 million, and a profit in tourism of 61,000. Any questions? On page 19, this is the balance sheet of the governmental fund, which is just in and of its city of itself, and it's basically a cash basis balance sheet. Does not have all the equipment or notes and everything in it. It shows that your total assets on the cash basis or on the fund basis is 13.2 million. Your total liabilities that you owe was 441,000, and your fund balance is 12.7 million. On page 20, reconciles that fund balance back to that net position, that full accrual of 12.7 down to 10.3, and shows explains those reconciling numbers, which is all capital assets, long-term debt, and the pension part. Page 21 is the fund basis, or again, the modified cash basis of the revenues and expenditures of the city. Your cash basis, you received 12.0 million in revenues. Your total expenditures was 8.8 million. You had an excess or a profit of 3.2 million. You had another 556,000 from the sale of assets. You had a $3.7 million total increase in fund balance, which took you from 8,991 in the previous year to 12.7 for the current year. On page 22, reconciles that cash profit of 3.7 back down to that full accrual profit of 1.5, and it shows all the different items that changes those numbers for accrual basis. Any questions? Your next section is the notes to the financial statements. It tells how all these numbers and how the city actually operates and how the accounting system works. I'm not going to read all these notes to you. I will point out on page 30 and 31, that tells you a breakdown of all the assets that the city owns, whether they're in buildings, improvements, equipment, vehicles, land, construction in progress, and how much depreciation is on it. That gives you information to show that. and then 31 shows the same assets for the utility system and the tourism commission. Okay? And the balance is the current numbers. On page 32 then shows your accumulated depreciation on each of those items for the year. Okay. And then I'll point out on page 34, that is how much debt that the city has. And the main part that you need to start, kind of look at is up to, or down to that cat loader. That is the actual debt that you're responsible for. The other three numbers, net pension, and those actually come from the state. The estimated land closure fee is the $200,000 that if you had to completely wrap up the landfill, that's what it, the remediation requires you to account for. Okay. Then down in the component units, the first section is the debt on the utility system, and then it has the same things there as the net pension, the customer deposits, and what's due on sewer line construction. And then your bottom is the tourism commission. Okay. Page 35 is broken down to show you the next 5 years outlays of, in the first set of columns, primary government, and then the component unit utilities, component unit tourism, shows your next 5 years of what the principal payments and interest payments would be on each of them, and then in 5-year increments thereafter, showing your total debt was $8.1 million in the city, $2.8 million of interest would be due over that time frame, 13.8 in the utilities in principal, 5.1 in interest over the time frame, and 3.2 in tourism of $996,000 in interest due. Okay. I will skip these pension notes that are coming up because all of them come from the state. And we will move all the way to page 55, which is your budget for last year. The original budget compared to the final budget compared to the actual results. So I'm going to stay in the totals. The total revenues, the final budget budgeted for total revenues 11.4 million. The actual revenues was 12.0 million. It was a favorable variance of 565,000, which means you collected 565 more than what you had budgeted to collect. Your total expenditures, you had originally budgeted 11.6, then dropped it to 9.6. And your actual expenditures is 8.9, which is a favorable variance of 712,000, meaning you spent 712,000 less than what you had budgeted. So your budget, your excess that you originally on the final budget was 1.7. Your actual excess is 3.0. It's a 1.2 favorable variance. And your total other sources, you budgeted for 536. You actually collected 556. That's a 20,000 variance, and a 1.2 total net change favorable variance on that, which means you actually did a lot better than what you were planning or budgeted out for. And some of that is due to delays and deciding to push things off to the next year and things like that, because you may not be able to get vehicles or different things on that. That was budgeted. Okay. What I was talking about earlier on the pension, on page 60, the top part shows the hazardous part. In the middle part of it shows the non-hazardous part. The contractual requirements by the city to pay to the state pension was $294,081 for hazardous. That's your police officer and fire department. You met that contractual, all that money was paid. There is no deficiency in that. Your covered payroll in those departments is $868,000. The amount that represents is 33.86%. That is the contractual obligation that the city has to match. The non-hazardous was 293,112 for the required contribution. You met the 293,112. Your covered payroll is 1.3 million. That's 21.17% of that number, and that is the contractual requirement if you went to KPPA and looked at it. And then on page 63, that is the health insurance part of the pension. And it's the same numbers except for the contractual requirements are 10.47 and 5.78. And how much is due on that. Okay. Your next section, starting at page 66 through 70, those are breaking down those numbers for general government, the regular ABC regulatory, industrial, breaking them down into how much was spent for the different categories, the different items. So if you look at the total of 1.05 is the number that's back over at the beginning. That's all the expenses, how it breaks down to make up those numbers. And like in the center, shows your personnel cost on each of these. The Parks and Rec department is shown in totals for department, as is, other than the general part of Public Works, general administrative, the rest of the department, street, solid waste, transfer station, is shown in total as well on page 70. And then on page 71 is the schedule of expenditure of federal awards. That's the expenses or expenditures that you spent from the federal money that you received. And the water and wastewater program of 2.6 million, that money passes, it's technically in the city of Leitchfield's name, but it's actually for the utility system department. So it gets reported in the city of Leitchfield and in the utility, because that's where it says pass through to the city of Leitchfield, and what it means is passed through to the utilities. And then your next ones are direct awards that you received, $919,000 from the COVID coronavirus relief fund, which is ARPA, which was the ARPA funds, the second payment of those. You had the Department of Transportation grant for recreational trails. You had a state and community highway grant of $15,000. You had an airport improvement grant of $22,000, and then they had a high-intensity drug trafficking program for the police department that was passed through to it from LaRue County of $2,130. Total federal grants received was $3.7 million. 72 talks about how we audited those grants and what we considered to be the information on that. It also shows how much on the water and wastewater disposal system is related to federal money from those federal bonds that were issued on it, Series A and Series B. 73 is the report on internal control and compliance under governmental auditing standards. And in the paragraph before, it gives you the definitions of what we were looking for, deficiencies, material weaknesses, and significant deficiencies. The bottom tells you that it says, our consideration of internal control was for our limited purposes described in the first paragraph of this section, was not designed to identify any and all deficiencies in internal control that might be a material weakness or significant deficiency. Given these limitations during the audit, we did not identify any deficiencies in internal control that we considered to be material weaknesses. And then it goes on and says, however, material weaknesses may exist that were not identified. What that really means is on everything that we tested, there was no deficiencies or material weaknesses in internal control. If they said that they were going to be signed off, it was signed off on. If it said it was going to be approved, it was approved. But because we do a test, instead of looking at every single transaction, we only select a percentage based on that. We did not find anything, nothing came to our attention, and therefore it's basically saying that there may be some out there that we just didn't uncover when we did our test. Compliance and other matters, the gist of that is that it says at the bottom of the last sentence, the results of the test disclose no instances of noncompliance or other matters that are required to be reported. That basically means all reports, all compliance, all KRS requirements and everything were met, that everything was filed the way it was supposed to be. Your last report is on the federal grants, major programs. There was two. One being the $2 million grant for the water plant. The other one being the $900,000 plus for the ARPA funds. And the second paragraph says that the city of Leitchfield complied in all material respects with the types of compliance requirements referred to above that could have a direct material effect on each major program. That basically means that everything was approved that it was spent for. We looked at the pay requests, we looked at the approvals, we looked at the payments, we looked at this information that was submitted to the Department of Local Government for the ARPA funds, and everything that was supposed to be done was completed. And then the last part, it kind of talks about what we were supposed to do. The last part is the report on internal control over compliance. That's again talking about the deficiencies, material weaknesses, significant deficiencies under the federal programs. There was none of those identified as well. Okay. The last page gives a summary of the audit results and question costs. There was no question cost reported. And again, it tells you there the two programs was the water and wastewater program and the U.S. Department of Treasury coronavirus grant that we used. And the amount that we had to distinguish was $750,000. So it's the two grants that you received that was greater than $750,000 that we looked at. Any questions? Quickly, the last letter is a letter to you all. Basically what that states is it tells you what is your significant audit areas there in the first page, and then it states down on the next page that the financial statements were neutral, consistent, and clear. That just means that they were consistent with the prior year, that based on the way they're written, they should be clear to the parties that need them. And then it states that we encountered no difficulties with management or anything getting the information. It talks about the two entries that we had to make. Those two entries are reported in every city, and it's because those entries actually come from the state of Kentucky to do with the pension and OPEB. There was no disagreements with management. Management representation letter has been signed, and to our knowledge, there's been no consultations. There's no other audit findings. I'll end with this. If y'all go home and read this, get confused about it, want me to come back, sit down with you on one-on-one or anything, I will be happy to do that. Let Lori or Sabrina know. We'll get that scheduled, and I'll be happy to sit down and go through every detail and tell you what makes up every number if that's what we need to do. Okay? Mayor, I appreciate it.
How about emails? If we have a question, can we just?
You can email me.
That'd be
You can email
easier
me.
than just a
They have my email. I don't have any cards in here with me.
I can get it
That's-
to them all.
But
Or
Lori
just
has my email.
contact
You can
you.
email me any questions.
I did have one question on the COVID money. Is there
Okay.
any chance that may have to be repaid? I know some of the grants from other agencies I was involved with, they always held out that not expected to, but there's always a possibility that
There
may.
is always a possibility that money can be paid, have to be repaid. However, based on the information that I have looked at from Lori reconciled, and even the state wrote back on her email that her records were reconciled out and thanked her for the reconciliation. I saw that email as well. So her information that went down through there proving the numbers that they did and everything reconciled out on the payroll during that time frame.
So it sounds like we're in pretty good shape on
Yeah,
something
yeah.
not to worry.
But to answer your question, yes, there's always, and threw so much money at cities and states and everything that you know, they basically took that pie and divided it up. And then they left it to the cities to decide how it's going to be distributed and everything. And if the cities couldn't come up with a way to spend all that money, then yeah, some of those cities have had to pay some of that money back.
Okay.
But based on the way I looked at it, y'all shouldn't have to pay any back.
So we wouldn't have any concerns as holding anything back?
You should
in
not have
case-
any
Okay,
concerns on that.
thank you.
Okay, I mean, unless they come in here and look at it and do something different than I did, you should not have any concerns. And, you know, compared to the bigger metropolitan areas, which is the ones that they're actually looking at, you all are, this was a drop in the bucket on that. Okay? Any other questions?
Jeff, we appreciate your hard work on this, and Lori, and Sabrina.
Sabrina's the brains behind all that.
Well, I know it's tough, it's tough to
How
come
many
up
years
with all
you been with
those,
us
but we appreciate your,
Several. It goes back to, I worked with Erin for 2 years before she left and went. So I'm trying to think,
Long time.
that's about,
You've been here ever since
Four.
this is my 10th year.
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It's been about 11, 12 years.
12, yeah.
Yeah, probably. You had just started,
Yeah,
I think.
that's what I'm thinking. I was,
My first year was when Erin moved over and Kim had became,
yeah.
and you were just starting accounts payable, is that right?
Yeah, so that would have been 2013.
Okay, so 10, 11 years.
well, we appreciate you guys.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate working. I cannot stress it hard enough. I do appreciate working with you all. You all have had really good finance officers. They're really detail oriented in what they do, and they make my job to an extent a lot easier to get the numbers and everything. Now, y'all have a lot of stuff going on, which takes me taking numbers that your trial balance is 28 or 32 pages long just for the city, and I'm combining this down to these financial statements to 1 or 2 pages. So I've got to find a lot of numbers and make sure I get them. And if you add different things in there, I've got to make sure I get it in the right category. So that's part of the thing because of the detail on it. But it's detailed enough, and it's usually straight up enough that if I'm having a problem reconciling something, I can get with Sabrina and she can tell me what was actually went on with that and what that was actually for.
Well, it's good to hear
Okay.
people are on top of things.
Yeah,
So,
they're pretty well on top of things. They're good.
okay.
Okay.
You got any questions or anything? Anything
No.
else for?
I don't have any questions at this point in time.
Okay.
I appreciate everything that y'all have done, and I look forward
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks.
to continue to
Appreciate
work
it.
with you all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you a lot.
Thank you.
So we ready to go to the next?
We just need a motion.
Okay.
So move with the motion, accept the audit.
Second.
Second by Clayton. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Approval of resolution pertaining to the Brandenburg Road Sidewalk Grant. Is,
Wes had told me that a contract would come in on Wes had told me that a contract would come in on the sidewalk grant on Brandenburg Road, and it does require a resolution be passed. And the money is going to be released in phases, so there will be some additional contracts. But this is the first phase, and the first phase is going to be $40,000, which is released.
is
And
everybody,
And Lori had passed out a copy of that contract.
The total is 198, wasn't it?
It is.
is everybody aware of the projects that we're talking about?
I wasn't until
Okay.
a little while ago.
Terry, you,
Billy said that it was to make that sidewalk up on the hill compliant.
yeah. So,
Is this money only allotted for that?
Yes, it has
Okay.
to specifically be used.
Can we look into possibly funding somewhere or with the state or something with the sidewalk that's in front of the Catholic cemetery on Brandenburg Road, because it is literally crumbling from underneath?
I can talk to Wes to see if
Okay,
there's any other
that'd be
grants
great.
that could be applied for.
Thank you.
Has any more ever been said about the sidewalk possibility out K Mill Road?
Not that I know of. Do you know, Heather?
That may be something, we're limited today to what we can discuss
Exactly.
according to the agenda, but maybe something we can look at later, Clayton, bring up in a regular meeting.
But what does Tina vote to accept the resolution?
I recommend that we go forward with this. Tina, you got ready?
I got a question.
Okay.
Real quick. So a resolution is just us saying that we agree to release the money. This is a project that has already been decided on, and we're just saying that we agree. Is that,
You're authorizing the mayor to sign the contract
Okay.
with, and then the money would be released.
okay, thank you.
Anybody else? All right, so I'll entertain a motion to accept the contract.
I make it.
Allow me to sign the contract. Clayton made a motion, a second.
I'll second for you to sign.
Gina, a second. All in favor? Any opposed? Billy voted opposed, so.
Okay.
I'll vote for it.
Oh, you voted for it,
Yeah.
okay. There may be some questions as far as, Billy may be aware of some of them, as far as some of the residents there.
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
it's
think
gonna be trouble.
I think it's a right of way. I mean, I don't even think it's gonna concern us when it comes down to it. I think they own the right of way to the property owners, what he's having a problem with anyway. So I don't know what we do about that, or how they compensate or not, or just tough luck, or
Okay,
with that there. He's
Okay.
expressed, I think, to a couple of us that he's not willing to budge on it and
okay.
has concerns.
I'll look into it with Wes.
Yeah.
Wes has had a conversation with him, I don't know, a week or so ago, Billy, maybe, something like
Yes.
that.
I had one with him, and then I sent Wes over to have one with him, and I don't think Wes got any more than I did with him, but, and I understand his concerns. I mean, I understand
too.
exactly where he's at. He thinks it's gonna ruin his property more. But like I explained to him, the sidewalks deteriorating. So we have to do something, because several people use it. And I know they cross the street to use it there, because most people live, or a lot of people, like David knows, lives in Hillview, and some of them are challenged. And so, but once we started on it, as Wesley and I tried to explain, we have to get it in compliance. It's a federal grant. It's not a state grant,
Yep.
you know, so I think then Wesley did some checking on right-of-ways, and the right-of-way was up by where he had concerns. So I don't know how that works out. Whether it's,
I'll double check with Wes and see what he found and make sure it's legally. Yeah.
I tried to explain it's gonna be all better, but and like I said, I understand his.
Yeah, I understand completely, so maybe something you want to check into, Arlene, that way we can, I'm sure we'll have more conversations about it before it starts, so.
Okay, I will do that.
And Wesley told me that it wasn't gonna be an overnight deal. It's gonna take a while and to get it going and to get the funding in, and whether they's gonna do it in phases or how they were going to do it, because he's got a driveway in the middle of it too. The property owner.
Yes.
So,
Well, I will talk to Wes then.
Okay. Has anybody got any other questions on that? Like I say, that's something we'll be addressing in the future, I'm sure, so. If you have any questions, talk to Billy, we can talk to Wes, and, see what exactly the concerns are, and that way everybody will be on the same page, know what's going on. Okay. I guess with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Clayton, second. Tootie, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed?